Freeport Caladrius pretended not to care what passed through its docking rings. From orbit, it looked like a halo of rusted silver around a pale gas giant, all glittering traffic beacons and rotating cargo spokes. Up close, the air smelled of machine oil, spices, and too many bodies. The station's charter called it neutral commercial territory, but neutral was just a polite way of saying everyone's hands were equally dirty. Diplomat Ines Calderón knew that, before she stepped into the private auction gallery. She just had not understood how far the dirt went. The room itself was tasteful, muted, a ring of cushioned seats facing a low, transparent wall that looked down into a warehouse below. A bar on one side poured carefully anonymized beverages. The light was dim, flattering to expensive skin, scales, and carapaces alike. Down below, in the warehouse, children were lined up in rows. They wore blank gray tunics. Some stood straight through drilled discipline. Some swayed with exhaustion. Some stared up, confused by the glare and noise. There were human faces among them, but also purple-skinned Nasali, bronze-plated Threxil offshoots, narrow-framed Auriv, and smaller species, whose names Ines did not even know. The auctioneer's voice purred through hidden speakers, translated into dozens of tongues. Lot 1. Mixed species juveniles, prepubescent, unmodified, minimal conditioning, projected obedience index, moderate. Initial bid. Ines did not look at the translation band around her wrist. She heard the words in her own language, and in every other, layered, units, lots, indices. Her stomach tightened. On the far side of the gallery, a Vyrukan in ceremonial armor raised a bidding wand without visible emotion. They are not pretending these are anything but children, she thought. They are simply pretending that calling them lots makes it acceptable. She was, technically, only here to observe, to collect information, to confirm rumors about what reclamation sales really were. But the moment she saw a human boy of about 8 years, lip quivering as he squeezed another child's hand, labeled with a holotag that read, Lot 3, high utility manual labor stock, something in her locked. If we walk away, we are complicit, she thought. If humanity walks away, we are the same as everyone else in this room. From the bar, a Kolvar broker, with an elongated chitinous skull and expensive cloth draped from its shoulders approached. Its name, filtered through her translator, was Draz Vosk. He smelled faintly of citrus and electrical discharge. You look troubled, envoy, Draz said politely. First time at a consolidation event? Ines made herself meet the inhuman gaze. First time, she agreed. I was under the impression that these were rehabilitative placements. Draz's mandibles clicked in a smile. Semantics. These juveniles would starve without patrons. Their worlds are ash, their guardians dead. What better fate than productive service? Besides, the contracts are fully compliant with the concordance writ. That document is old, Ines said. Its authors weren't thinking about this. They were thinking about commerce, Draz countered. Commerce sustains civilization. Those who cannot protect their young outsource it. That is all. Down below, the Vyrukan raised his wand and won Lot 1. The children were led out in a double-file line, security collars blinking. One little Nasali girl glanced up, eyes luminous, as if searching for someone to object. No one did. Ines felt something crack, but her voice stayed mild. You mentioned a larger event, she said. Something grander? Ah. Draz's eyes brightened. Yes. Kharas Gate. A once-cycle consolidation. 30,000 units in a single op. War zones. Failed states. Pirate interdictions. Efficient. Elegant. The Threxil are underwriting security. 30,000. The number hung in Ines's mind like a weight. Draz chuckled softly. If your Terran Concord wishes to play in the big tiers, envoy, you should attend. There will be opportunities. She smiled, as if she were interested in profit, memorized every detail he offered, and left the gallery before she said something that would get her shot. Back aboard the Terran Concord flagship HSS Samaritan, The air smelled of recycled cleanliness and human coffee. It was no less artificial than Caladrius, but Ines could breathe here. Admiral Kade Halbrook stood at the head of the situation table, a tall, solid presence in the blue and black uniform of the fleet. Dark eyes, steady. The wrinkles around his mouth had been carved by decades of bad options. The room's holoprojectors painted shifting layers of information in the air. Shipping routes, legal codes, Draz's offhand remarks, grainy footage from the warehouse. Around the table sat Captain Neha Kuroma of Chainfall Brigade, Dr. Mireille Sato, Sergeant Jarek Zielny, Systems Specialist Ruo-Fei Jin, Pilot Yunus El Masri, and several other senior officers. Ines finished her briefing. Silence settled. "They call it a consolidation," she said at last. "But it's an auction, the largest their network has ever held. The hosts are Kharas Gate and a Threxil-aligned platform called Ember Spindle. 30,000 children from at least 8 major species. Sorted by use profile. Evaluated, tagged, scheduled for sale." Mireille's fingers tightened around a data slate. Her voice was soft. "And once the contracts are signed, any attempt to interfere becomes piracy, or worse, an act of war." Ruo-Fei pushed up their glasses, gaze flicking between strings of legal text. "The concordance writ is a marvel of hypocrisy," they muttered. Article 9, Case Law Appendices, Subclause on Reallocation of Post-Conflict Assets. This is what it was always about, people as assets. Jarek shifted in his seat, jaw working. He had the compact build of a soldier who had spent years in artificial gravity and drop harnesses. "So we hit the platforms before the sale starts," he said. "Extract the kids, burn the networks. In full view of 100 sovereign flags?" Ines asked. "With every major power in attendance, the Threxil would brand us raiders, the Auriv would call for sanctions, the Kolvar would cut off half our trade. We are not strong enough to take on all of them at once." "Then we are not strong enough to do nothing," Jarek shot back. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Admiral Halbrook had listened without comment. Now he exhaled, slow and measured. "We are not choosing between an easy right and an easy wrong," he said. "We are choosing which form of catastrophe to accept." Yunus leaned forward, forearms on the table. "Sir, with respect, if we walk away, it won't just be catastrophe. It'll be identity. Everyone sees this. Everyone sees that we knew. They'll remember who looked at those children and did a cost-benefit analysis." Halbrook smiled very faintly. "You think I haven't been remembering that since Ines walked in?" He turned to Ruo-Fei. "You said something earlier, in the prep notes. A protocol. Chainfall," Ruo-Fei said. Their eyes sharpened. It was a thought experiment. How you could break a crime network without firing a shot. It wasn't meant to be real. "Walk us through it," Halbrook ordered. Ruo-Fei straightened and keyed a sequence into the holotable. The air filled with new diagrams, branches of credit, contract chains, legal citations. "The slaver economy doesn't just run on guns," they said. "It runs on legitimacy, contracts, escrow accounts, arbitration courts under the concordance. They're parasites on the bones of civilization. So Chainfall doesn't attack their ships, it attacks their assumptions." They highlighted 3 nodes in the glowing web. Step 1. Legality. The concordance writ allows recognized polities to participate in auctions as buyers. There are no restrictions based on moral stance, only on payment reliability. So we don't show up as liberators. We show up as customers. "Buying slaves," Mireille said quietly. "Buying children," Ruo-Fei corrected, "with full legal rights to their ownership." The word stuck in their throat, and then we void their commodity status. We register them as free citizens under Terran law and allied laws. The concordance doesn't have language for retroactively downgrading a person from property to citizen across polities. They never anticipated someone would try. Jarek frowned. "What if the others just declare the sales invalid?" "That's where Step 2 comes in." Ruo-Fei zoomed out, showing banking structures, rating agencies, long-latency trust webs, anchor codes. The core of every major credit validation system. They're supposed to be unhackable. They're not. You broke them, Halbrook said. Ruo-Fei hesitated. Guilt flickered across their face. I found vulnerabilities. With anchor codes, we can make Terran credit appear, for a window of hours or days, to be the most reliable in the region. We can outbid every other buyer without any of the normal flags triggering. By the time the system realizes something is wrong, station law will have recorded us as the legal owners. And step 3? Ines asked. Light, Ruo-Fei said. The Ember Ledger, Ember Spindle's data store. If Ines's contact is right, it contains their entire supply chain, where the kids were taken from, who paid for which raids, which governments looked the other way. We steal it and broadcast it through Axiom Crown's public channels. Once the entire galaxy sees their own leaders' names next to War Orphan Lot 17, the political cost of rolling back those contracts skyrockets. Eunice let out a low whistle. You're talking about bankrupting ourselves in public, then shaming the galaxy into not punishing us for it. Yes, Ruo-Fei said. And saving 30,000, and however many more we can reach later. If the plan works, and if it doesn't, Neha asked. Then we will be debt-ridden pariahs with a station full of dead children, Halbrook said, voice steady. Or dead ourselves, or both. Silence held again. Every person around the table weighed the possibilities. They saw the career-ending headlines, the ruined trade deals, the angry voters back home whose taxes would feed strangers' kids on faraway worlds. They saw the Threxil fleets, the Kolvar sanctions, the Auriv councils demanding discipline. They also saw the warehouse on Caladrius, the boy with the quivering lip. Humans were very good at calculating self-interest. They were also, unfortunately for the universe, very bad at ignoring certain kinds of suffering. Halbrook looked around the table. I will not order anyone to ruin their career for this, he said quietly, or to risk their life for children they've never met. But I can tell you that when future generations tell the story of our species, this will be a moment they look at. And they will ask, what did we do when we had the choice? Jarek spoke first. Sir, with respect, if you try to leave me behind, I'll steal a shuttle and go anyway. Neha snorted softly. He will, she said. I've seen him do stupider things for smaller stakes. You'll need ground leadership. I'll take it. Mireille exhaled. Someone will have to patch them up, she said. The kids and the soldiers. I'm in. Eunice rolled his shoulders, an old pilot's ritual. You're going to need someone to thread shuttles through whatever mess the Threxil kick up, he said. I'd hate to miss that show. Ines met Halbrook's gaze and nodded once. I started this, she said. I'm not stopping at exposure. I'll handle the diplomacy. Or the damage control. Ruo-Fei stared at the holoweb like it was a loaded weapon of their own making. We don't have enough money, they said. Not really. Even if anchor codes hold, paying out will break us for a decade. Halbrook leaned on the table, fingers splayed. Then we will be poor, he said. And our descendants will argue about whether we were fools. But they will not say we turned our faces away. He straightened. Set Chainfall Protocol to active, he ordered. We go to Kharas Gate. Kharas Gate had been built in a time when optimism still existed. Its architects had imagined a shining hub on the frontier, a place where traders of a dozen species would meet under bright banners, where disputes would be settled in arbitration halls instead of wars. Centuries of neglect and compromise had turned that dream into something else. The station was massive. Kilometers of rotating rings and bulging modules lashed together around a central spine, but its gleam had dulled. Newer sections were grafted onto old, like scar tissue. The most profitable decks were spotless. The forgotten ones rotted in the dark. As the HSS Samaritan approached, escorted by a handful of smaller Terran ships, Kharas Gate filled the viewport. Docking controllers sent sanitized greetings. The Threxil warship line glittered nearby, hulls armed and painted in brutal angular patterns. Kolvar transports lurked like sleek predators. Auriv cruisers maintained polite distance, transmitting their presence for the record. Nisali vessels twined gracefully in the outer lanes. Humans were still seen as newcomers. Ambitious. Unpredictable. Sometimes charming. Sometimes dangerous. But still, minor. That assumption would not survive the next few days. In the Samaritan's deployment bay, Neha checked her harness and the disguised civilian jacket over her armor. The jacket's cut and insignia marked her as executive security for a Terran resource collective, whose financial footprint Ruo-Fei had exhaustively fabricated. "Remember," Neha told her team, voice on the local channel, "today we're not soldiers. We're muscle for rich people. You're here to look intimidating, not start fights." "Safety's on, unless I say otherwise," Jarek grunted. "Understood, Captain. Intimidating, not initiating. We can do that." "You can try," Eunice's voice came over the ship-wide net, amused. "Shuttle 1 is ready. Docking slots confirmed. Kharas Gate thinks we're here to spend money we don't have." "Technically we have it," Ruo-Fei muttered from the systems bay, fingers dancing over virtual controls. "The ledgers all say we do, just not necessarily in a way that survives an audit." Neha smiled despite herself. The team moved with the easy grace of people who trusted each other's competence. Behind them, med teams prepped, cargo bays transformed into temporary shelters. Ines adjusted the translator set at her neck and joined Neha at the shuttle ramp. "We need to make Draz believe we're more afraid of missing a deal than offending anyone," she murmured. "That's not entirely false," Neha replied. "Missing this deal means kids die." The shuttle's ramp shut with a hiss. Eunice took them into the gray, busy approach lanes, slipping into Kharas Gate's controlled traffic like a fish into a crowded current. On the station, the air was thicker, the gravity a fraction lighter. Advertisements flashed in dozens of languages. Security nodes tracked movement silently. Neha's augmented eyes tagged weapons, threat metrics, escape routes. They met Draz at an upscale lounge hanging over one of the inner atriums. Below, ships glided through transparent tubes. Above, banners displayed logos of major corporate patrons. Draz looked them over with a practiced eye, noting the quality of their clothes, the way Neha's supposed bodyguard scanned the room. "Envoy Calderón," he said. "And associates, I am delighted your patrons decided to attend." Ines smiled a politician's smile. "You spoke highly of the event. They are always hungry for opportunity. Aren't we all?" Draz gestured for them to follow. "Come, the preliminary viewings are about to begin. Our main attraction starts in 3 hours." They descended through layers of security into the sunken bazaar, Kharas Gate's commercial heart. Here, the lights were lower, shadows deeper. Stalls sold everything from spice to cybernetics. Some things did not officially exist. And beyond that, deeper still, lay the glass warrens. The name came from the walls. Panels of reinforced transparent material separating corridors and cages. It was efficient architecture. From any vantage point, guards could see dozens of pathways. It was also a spectacle. Buyers could stroll above, pointing out desirable lots, like shoppers choosing fabric. Children occupied the compartments, hundreds of them. Some clutched ragged blankets, others stared in sullen defiance. Implants glittered at the base of shaved skulls. Labels hovered over each compartment: combat conditioning, domestic training, labor ready. Profiles listed projected obedience and estimated lifespan returns. Mireille, walking with the second Terran group, under pretext of a medical inspection, felt her throat constrict. Her mind cataloged malnutrition, untreated infections, signs of neurological damage from shock collars and forced neuroplastic training. A little human girl sat rocking, eyes flat, muttering something under her breath that sounded like a song without melody. Jarek marched beside her, every muscle screaming to break formation. One Nasali child, skin shimmering with bioluminescent stress patterns, pressed her hands against the glass and whispered, "Help?" In halting trade speech. Mireille's eyes met hers, and the girl flinched as if burned by hope. She dropped her hands, retreating to the back wall. "Soon," Mireille whispered, though the girl could not hear. "Soon." Above them, on an observation bridge, a slender Nasali figure paused. Seveia was officially an observer, representing a pacifist bloc of her compact's civic assemblies. Her species' empathic senses, picked up emotional resonance as easily as others heard sounds. The ambient feeling in the glass warrens was a poisonous fog. Fear, despair, hunger. Seveia walked here only because she believed someone needed to bear witness. Today, beneath that fog, she sensed something else. A sharp line of contained outrage, honed like a blade, carried by several of the new arrivals. Human minds, rough and bright, pressed down their anger behind masks of calculation. She rested one hand lightly on the rail and brushed, very gently, against Captain Neha's surface thoughts. Images flared: the boy in the Caladrius warehouse, a hand signing a legal document, a mental map of the station with corridors marked in red and green. Words: "Don't start the fight. End it." Seveia jerked back, heart racing. She had expected greed, or at least detached pragmatism. Instead, she had felt a determination so fierce it startled her. It was not a desire to own. It was a refusal to leave. Interesting, she thought. Dangerous. She watched as the human party completed their inspection, making notes in their slates, murmuring to Draz about quality and conditioning. Their faces repulsed her, because she could see the rage beneath. And yet she could not deny that something in that rage resonated with her own helplessness. When the grand auction began, the central hall of Kharas Gate's commercial ring was full to the edges. Tiered seating wrapped around an open space where holos floated, each representing a lot. High above, flags of attending powers rippled in circulating air. On an elevated platform, Warlord Krazhul loomed, armored and surrounded by Threxil guards. His reptilian features carved a very clear message into the air: challenge this event, and you challenge the Dominion. Beside him, Draz presided over the bidding podium. Marak Dun of the Vyrukan hegemony sat with calculated boredom, ceremonial helmet at his feet. Admiral Talar Ison of the Auriv League occupied an observer's box, jaw clenched. Orders from his government, ringing in his memory: do not interfere without cause. Record. Report. Nothing more. Seveia sat in the Nasali delegation's tier, nerves jangling from the emotional weight in the room. Around her, buyers radiated anticipation. The human delegation took their seats without ceremony. Neha at the center, Ines to her right, Ruo-Fei to her left, Jarek and other bodyguards at the edges. Hollows flared. The first major lot, 500 mixed-species teenagers with documented combat conditioning. A dream purchase for any state or cartel looking to bolster expendable forces. Opening bid. Draz announced a figure that made several smaller syndicates flinch. Threxil representatives signaled immediately. Vyrukan envoys followed, numbers climbing. Kolvar proxies added their own. The numbers danced upward, each increment a calculation: cost versus utility, risk versus reward. Neha waited. Her heart drummed, but her hands remained loose. On the Samaritan, hanging in a safe orbit, Ruo-Fei's systems team pressurized anchor codes into the local financial streams. Lines of code slipped through verificators, inserting microscopic lies into the core of Kharas Gate's credit scaffolding. Terran accounts, previously respectable but not remarkable, suddenly glowed in back-end systems with exceptional reliability markers. Every automated check cross-referenced them and found, thanks to Ruo-Fei's work, an unbroken history of timely settlement, massive collateral, and implicit backstops. On the station, Ruo-Fei watched a tiny green symbol blink on their wrist console. They leaned close to Neha. "We're live," they murmured. "For now, we are the richest people in the room." Neha lifted her bidding wand. "Increased bid from Terran Collective," Draz announced. His voice betrayed a hint of surprise. "New leading offer." Threxil symbols flashed a counter. Humans raised. Vyrukan delegates frowned. The numbers climbed higher than usual norms. Rumors whispered through the crowd. Talar Ison narrowed his eyes, calling up data on the supposed Terran syndicate. The profile looked thorough, perhaps too thorough. He filed the suspicion away. The humans kept their faces impassive. They did not flinch when the total crept into ranges that would fund a dozen cruisers. Ruo-Fei tracked the phantom balance. They knew, in some detached part of their mind, that what they were doing to the anchor codes would take years to unwind. assuming they survived to unwind it. Finally, the Threxil delegate paused. Calculations did not add. The lot's projected value no longer justified the numbers. Even empires had budgets. First call, Draz intoned. Second call, sold to the Terran collective. Applause rippled, polite and tinged with curiosity. The second lot opened. The humans bid. They won again. By the fifth, interest turned to irritation. A Kolvar whisper network lit up, questioning the long-term viability of these new players. Draz, watching the pattern, felt something sharp in his gut. It reminded him, unpleasantly, of realizing too late that a trading partner had misrepresented themselves. He halted the auction. "Esteemed participants," he said smoothly. A moment's pause. "We must ensure the integrity of our proceedings. Terran representatives, a brief consultation, if you please." Ines rose, all graciousness. "Of course, we value integrity." In a side chamber, insulated from the hall's noise, Draz faced Neha and Ines with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. "You have been impressively bold," he said. "Our systems show no irregularities, yet prudence demands additional assurances. Who precisely guarantees your accounts?" Neha let her gaze cool. "Do you know why my principals chose Kharas Gate?" she asked. "Enlighten me. Because your laws, unlike some others, do not discriminate against newer polities with unusual credit profiles. We have capital. We have backers you may not yet have cataloged. We also have choices about where we conduct future trade." She stepped closer, letting a hint of menace bleed into her tone. "Interrupt this event because we choose to buy thoroughly, and you'll send a very clear signal about the reliability of Kharas Gate agreements. We will take that knowledge elsewhere. So will those watching." Draz's mandibles tightened. The threat landed because it was mostly true. Kharas Gate's value lay in its reputation for neutrality and robust settlements. A rumor that the station canceled sales when a politically inconvenient buyer emerged would cut into its appeal. He considered Krazhul, waiting in the main hall with Threxil soldiers, who believed force solved every problem. He considered the Vairukan, who would happily spread tales of Kharas Gate's unreliability if it served their interests. He considered the Auriv and Nisali, who might seize on such a pretext to push for new regulations. Finally, he inclined his head. "You must understand," he said. "The magnitude of your purchases raises questions. But you are correct. Our law is clear. As long as the accounts settle, the auctions proceed." He returned to the hall and, swallowing his unease, reopened the bidding. The humans continued just as before, calm, relentless. Word spread through the tiers. By the time the main lots of untrained war orphans came up, entire delegations sat with wands resting unused, watching this unexpected drama. Seveia felt the emotional tenor shift. Instead of greedy anticipation, the room thrummed with tension, suspicion, a strange undercurrent of something like awe. On the floor, holos stacked, 3,000 here, 800 there, 12,000 in grouped bundles. Each time Draz announced a new lot, the humans bid. Each time, they won. Some tried to compete out of principle. The Threxil delegate glared and raised numbers beyond anything his handlers had authorized. Marekduin signaled twice out of sheer stubbornness before his comm bead crackled with a reprimand. The humans did not blink. Marekduin, Marekduin, one. Marekduin, Marekduin. Ines's hand ached from holding the bidding wand. She thought of the budgets she had argued over in Concord assemblies, the line items for education, infrastructure, defense. She mentally multiplied numbers. "We are spending 20 years of one colony's developmental funding in one afternoon," she thought. "For children whose names most of our citizens will never learn." Then she pictured the glass warrens again and decided that was a bargain. At last, after what felt like hours, the final lot's holo dimmed. "Sold," Draz said, voice slightly hoarse. "To the Terran collective." The hall burbled with whispers. By the station's own law, the moment that word left his mouth, ownership of those 30,000 children transferred, payment settlement would take cycles to argue over in arbitration courts. But the ledger entries were clear. In Kharas Gate's control cores, automated processes spun up. They registered the change in legal status and began routing orders. Detach these lots from these pens. Assign them to these transfer corridors. Update collars with new access codes. On a hidden channel, Neha's wristband vibrated. "That's it," Ruo-Fei's voice came through, taut but exultant. "The station thinks those kids are Terran assets now. Transfers are queued. We have a window before anyone can rewrite it without creating a visible legal scandal." Neha stood. "Then let's go collect what we paid for," she said. In the glass warrens, doors eye-rised open. Station guards frowned down at their slates, confused by new instructions, but complied. Groups of children were herded into corridors. They shuffled, dazed, some expecting a new set of masters, some too exhausted to care. Jarek's Chainfall Brigade squads moved to intercept. "Easy," he called gently, raising his empty hands when the first group balked. "We're not here to hurt you. We're getting you out." Most did not trust him immediately. Why would they? But his soldiers formed solid walls between the children and any other approach. Their armor bore the Terran insignia and a new emblem, hastily painted, a broken chain. Mireille and her team set up makeshift triage stations in cleared cargo bays. Med drones hummed. Translators chattered. She tried to sort the stream into categories: immediate medical need, high trauma risk, unaccompanied siblings. "Name?" she asked a boy whose arm was bound in a crude splint. He blinked at her. "Unit C, 39. Not anymore." She offered a small, careful smile. "You'll get a real name once you're safe. For now, we'll just call you Zero. Does that sound all right?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. It was a tiny thing, but for Mireille it felt like a wedge driven into the edifice of what had been done to him. Far above, in the Ember Spindle's data core, a different team moved in shadow. The Ember Ledger had no physical form, but the core where its quantum matrices resided was guarded like a treasure vault. Chainfall operatives in stolen maintenance uniforms bypassed alarms with stolen codes planted by Ruo-Fei through weeks of preparation. Inside the core chamber, air hummed with cooling systems. Cables glowed faintly. The central node pulsed like a mechanical heart. The lead operative slotted a Terran drive into the interface. "We're in," they whispered. "Beginning copy." Data flowed. Names, dates, routes. For each lot in the Kharas Gate auction, there were dozens of upstream entries. A burned village here, a pirate boarding there, a security resettlement somewhere else. Payments traced back to spoon-clean syndicates, to Threxil procurement budgets, to Vyrukan field armies, to Kolvar trade councils, to a handful of familiar Terran corporate logos. In the observation hall, Krazhul watched the humans leave. His thick fingers dug into the rail. "You allowed this," he hissed to Draz. Draz shifted uneasily. "They passed all verifications. The law will be whatever we force it to be," Krazhul snapped. "You have handed our enemies a narrative. 30,000 slaves saved by sentimental primates. Do you think that is a story we can afford?" Marekdoon watched with narrowed eyes. He had not particularly cared who bought the lots. To him, they were tools. But watching the children being escorted under Terran guard, not as chattel but as something else, stirred a strange irritation. Talar Ison, in his Auriv box, received a flurry of encrypted instructions from his government. He read them, lips thinning. His orders remained: observe, avoid direct conflict. The Auriv liked to speak of ethics in their charters, but when ethics collided with economics and fear, they preferred careful neutrality. Seveia could not maintain neutrality. The empathic storm rolling off the station was overwhelming. Fear, yes, but with a new thread. Thin, fragile hope. She stood abruptly and left the tier, following the emotional trail down toward the transfer corridors. She reached a balcony just as a confrontation began. Threxil troops, armored and armed, moved down a side passage that station control had assigned to Terran transfer. Their helmets bore Krazhul's personal sigil. Their commander's body language said, "We will not accept this humiliation." Jarek stepped forward, Chainfall Marines spreading out behind him, forming a line between the children and the Threxil. "This lane is secured for Terran transfer," he said in trade speech. "Your orders are out of date. Check the registry. The Threxil commander snorted, flicking a claw. The Dominion does not recognize the claim of apes who think they can buy what they cannot hold. Behind Jarek, a child whimpered. He did not look back. His voice hardened. "Then you misunderstand us," he said. "We aren't here to hold them. We're here to let them live. That is all." The Threxil raised his weapon. Seveia felt the moment stretch. Fear spiked. Rage answered. Jarek did not wait for the first shot to hit a child. His rifle snapped up, rounds glancing off the commander's armor plating, staggering him. The corridor erupted. Chainfall Marines fired in controlled bursts, always angling away from the cluster of children. Threxil soldiers advanced with heavy suppressive fire, less concerned with collateral. Neha, hearing the first shots, sprinted toward the intersection with a backup squad. She slid into cover, assessed, and began barking orders. "Shields forward! Move the kids behind bulkheads! Eunice, I need a route around this choke point right now." On the flight deck, Eunice swore softly and pulled up a map. "There's a maintenance shaft 2 decks up that bypasses that corridor," he said. "But it's not keyed to civilian or Terran access." "Ruo-Fei?" Neha demanded. "In progress," came the breathless reply. On their console, they dug through Kharas Gate's systems, overriding restrictions, recoding emergency access tables. "Okay, shaft Delta 12 opens in 10 seconds. I'm spoofing it as a fire control route." Panels hissed open. Terran medics hustled children up ladders, guiding them with firm, gentle hands. A shot ricocheted, searing a line across Jarek's shoulder armor. Pain flared. He ignored it. One Threxil tried to flank. Jarek dropped him with a snapped 3-round burst to the exposed joint. He hated this. He hated fighting through children, in a place where walls remembered cries. But he also knew that if they yielded here, if even one lot was retaken, the slavers would drag them through the feeds as proof that humanity could not follow through. On the Samaritan, Halbrook watched through helmet cams and station feeds. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. "This was always going to turn," he told his staff. "We just hoped it would be later." "Threxil fleet is powering weapons," a sensor officer reported. "They're holding at standby, but their formations are tightening. Kolvar escorts are aligning for interdiction. Auriv ships are holding position. Nasali vessels are broadcasting distress." Halbrook considered the geography. Samaritan in a polite holding orbit, Kharas Gate with thousands of civilians aboard. Threxil battleships ready to punish any perceived overstep. "If we stay back, they isolate our teams and take the kids," he said. "If we engage from here, we start a battle that kills everyone we came to save." He turned to navigation. "Bring us in," he said. "Close. Too close for them to shoot." "Sir?" the helmsman asked, startled. "Dock us to the ring," Halbrook said. "Right over the sectors where our people are. If the Threxil want to fire, they'll have to hit us and the station at the same time. Make it so anyone who pulls a trigger in space becomes responsible for a massacre on every feed in the system." It was reckless. It was, in Halbrook's mind, the only leverage they had left. Samaritan's engines flared. The ship broke from its polite orbit and dove toward Kharas Gate's main habitation ring. Threxil targeting systems tracked it. Weapons spooling up. A warning pinged on Auriv and Nasali bridges. Tilar Ison swore under his breath. "Samaritan, this is Auriv vessel Hieronym." He transmitted. "You are on an unauthorized approach vector. State your intentions." "Protecting civilians," Halbrook replied. "If you wish to stop us, Admiral, you can tell the galaxy why you let 30,000 children die." Telar's hands shook. He had no authority to fire. He had no authority to assist. But he knew exactly how those words would sound on a public broadcast. He cut the channel and ordered, "Hold course. Maintain distance. Record everything." Samaritan matched rotation with Kharas Gate, closing with a rumbling vibration felt through both hulls. Docking clamps extended, hunting for purchase not on a designated port, but on structural ribs. Emergency protocols screamed in both systems. Override. Unauthorized docking. Override. Override. Halbrook forced them through, authorizing connection as if the ship were an extension of the station. Metal met metal with a bone-deep clang. Structural integrity fields flared and stabilized. For a moment, the massive human ship hung half-embraced with the station, like a guardian throwing its body over a wounded friend. On Kharas Gate, the sudden mass shift registered as a tremor. Some sectors flickered in and out of gravity. In the transfer corridors, both slavers and rescuers staggered. "The hell was that?" Jarek gasped, bracing against a bulkhead. "Home," Neha said, feeling the resonance in the soles of her feet. "They're here." As Chainfall squads pressed forward, gaining ground by inches, Ruo-Fei's team finished copying the Ember Ledger. In the core chamber, alarms began to chime. Security had finally noticed the breach. "Go! Go!" the lead operative shouted. They yanked the drive free. Doors slammed behind them as they sprinted back toward a prearranged extraction point. On the Samaritan, Ruo-Fei plugged the drive into an isolated system. The data poured in, a roaring tide. They scanned snippets, enough to confirm Inez's worst suspicions. Some of the names were human. "Admiral," Ruo-Fei said softly, "this isn't just them. We have Terran subsidiaries in here, logistics firms, private security, buying surplus labor for remote outposts. Not all children, but enough." Halbrook closed his eyes briefly. "It would have been easier if we were spotless," he said. "We're not. That doesn't change what we do now." He looked to Ines. "You're sure about this? Once we push this out, there's no going back. We're not just rescuers anymore. We're accusers, across the board." Ines thought of the warehouse, of the glass warrens, of the faces in the transfer corridors. "Yes," she said. "If we keep any of it hidden, we become exactly what we're fighting. Besides, we'll need the outrage. It's all that will keep them from tearing us apart after this." Ruo-Fei's fingers danced. The Ember Ledger's contents threaded into an encrypted burst, routed through shadow channels to contacts on Axiom Crown. There, a small team of activists and journalists with no official ties to the Terran Concord waited for such a package. Within minutes, targeted feeds across inhabited space lit up. Public channels, private networks, encrypted forums, holoscreens in bars, personal slates, images from Ember Spindle's databanks, children in cages, teenagers in training pods, transaction logs with sterile language and obscene details, names of buyers and sellers, payment routes, bribes. The list rolled, seemingly endless. Overlaid atop some of the most egregious scenes were live snippets from Kharas Gate itself. Helmet cam footage of Chainfall Marines shielding cowering kids, medics wrapping blankets around shaking shoulders, Terran ships docking in impossible positions to hold the ring together. 1,000,000 eyes watched in horror. 100 million. Then more. On Nasali worlds, citizens doubled over as empathic waves from Seveia's broadcast reached them. Her own shock at human stubbornness, mixing with the children's terror and relief. On Auriv worlds, protest flags found in old drawers were pulled out and dusted off. Even in some Kolvar territories, where the economy was supposed to trump everything, young workers saw themselves in the faces of those units and felt something break. Back on Kharas Gate, Krazhul raged. His internal comms buzzed with new instructions: damage control, deny, delay. The Dominion's strategists were already calculating how to spin this, how to declare the humans criminals, how to paint the children as dangerous assets that needed to be managed. Krazhul, however, was a simple man in some respects. He believed in power. His solution was straightforward: kill enough people that no one would dare emulate this human madness. "Seal the inner rings," he snarled to his subordinates. "Cut power to transfer corridors. If we cannot have these assets, no one will. I am authorizing Failsafe Theta." Failsafe Theta was a line in station manuals that most administrators assumed would never be used. It allowed for the detachment of an entire habitat ring in case of uncontrollable contamination or structural failure. Unofficially, it was also a way to jettison inconvenient evidence. Deep in Kharas Gate's control nexus, hidden commands triggered ancient machinery. Explosive bolts primed. Structural couplings began to disengage on a section of the habitation ring that housed thousands of still unmoved children. "Warning," Klaxon screamed. Bulkhead status lights flickered from green to yellow to red. On the Samaritan's bridge, alerts chimed. "Admiral," "We're seeing separation events in Ring Sector 9, an officer reported. "They're trying to jettison a section. The venting path leads straight to vacuum." Halbrook stared at the schematic. A hollow formed in his chest. "How many still in that sector?" he asked. "Estimates. 5,000. Maybe more. Our people on the ground report they haven't reached all the pens there yet." He did the math. Time to full separation. Time to seal. Time to evacuate. The numbers did not add up, unless someone did something unreasonable. "Can we grab it?" he asked suddenly. The helmsman blinked. "Sir, can we physically hold that ring on?" Halbrook's gaze fixed on the schematic. "Our hull is fused to their structure now. If we push our integrity fields to maximum, reroute power from all but essentials, and attach grapples." "Sir, that could tear us in half," the chief engineer protested over comms. "And if the ring goes, it could take us with it." "If the ring goes without us, 5,000 children die," Halbrook said. "We did not come here to watch that happen. Do what you can. Make it hold." He opened a channel to Neha. Static crackled. The station's internal systems were glitching under the strain. "Captain Karoma," he said, "they're trying to jettison your sector. We're going to try to hold the ring on from outside. Inside, you need to stop the separation sequence." "Understood," Neha replied, without hesitation. "Where's the control hub?" Deck schematic shows manual override in junction node 9 gamma midline. Expect heavy resistance. "I'd hope so," she said grimly. "Otherwise, this would be too easy." Inside the threatened ring, gravity lurched as explosive bolts began to fire. Floors canted. Lights strobed. Children screamed. Some were flung against walls. Neha rallied her nearest squad. Jarek, bleeding from his earlier wound but still moving, fell in beside her. "We're not letting them cut us off," he said. "Good," Neha replied, "because we're going into the worst place on this station." They plunged into a service corridor, sprinting over flexing decks. Pipes burst, spraying vapor. An airlock behind them cycled erratically. They ran faster. On the outer hull, Samaritan's grapples fired. Heavy cables shot out, spearing into the station ring's external trusses. Structural fields pulsed, shimmering. The ship's frame groaned like a living thing. In the engineering decks, crews scrambled to reroute power. Lights dimmed across non-essential sectors. Recycling systems slowed. All available energy poured into the hull's reinforcement grid. Slowly, agonizingly, the ring's drift slowed. It did not stop. But its tearing strain eased enough that inner systems had a chance. In the control nexus at 9 gamma, a cluster of Threxil engineers and guards frantically worked the consoles, trying to override unexpected resistance from the coupled ship. When Neha's team blew the door, they turned as one, weapons up. The firefight that followed was brutal and close. There was no room for finesse, no time to flank. Shots ricocheted off steel. Sparks rained. One of Neha's Marines fell. Jarek stepped into a hail of fire to drag a wounded technician out of the line. As he did, a coupling gave way somewhere overhead. The floor heaved. A seam opened in the far wall, thin at first, then widening. Air screamed toward it, dragging loose objects and smaller bodies. A group of children huddled in a side alcove, eyes huge. The pressure tugged at them, pulling them toward the widening gap. Jarek dropped the wounded tech, lunged, and planted his boots against the deck. He grabbed a loose shielding plate from a fallen console and braced it between the kids and the vacuum, muscles straining. "Seal it!" he yelled over the roar. "Neha!" Neha saw the manual override lever halfway across the room, behind a fallen console. Bullets spat around it. She sprinted, sliding the last few meters, knocking the console aside with her shoulder. Her injured knee screamed protest. Behind her, Jarek's arms shook. He could feel the pull, the bone-deep insistence of space that wanted everything loose. He thought of Caladrius. He thought of the boy with the quivering lip. He thought of the look on a Nisali girl's face when someone had whispered, "Help. I am so tired of seeing that look," he thought. "If I have to die seeing it one more time, let it at least be with something between them and the dark." Neha reached the lever and wrenched it down. Auxiliary clamps fired. Emergency shutters shot into place over the gap, clanging into the frame. The roar of escaping air diminished to a whistle, then a hiss, then silence. Jarek sagged against the shielding plate, panting. The children behind him sobbed quietly, clinging to each other. One day, he gasped, "I'd like to take a nice, quiet desk job on a farm moon." "You'd last a week," Neha said, voice shaking. She offered him a hand, pulling him to his feet. "Come on, we still have to undo what these bastards started." At the console, she tore Krazhul's failsafe sequence out by hand, canceling the jettison commands, re-engaging the ring's structural locks. External sensors registered the change. On the Samaritan, alarms shifted from critical to cautionary. The strain on the hull eased. Engineers slumped against consoles, half laughing with adrenaline. "We've got it," someone said. "We've actually got it." Krazhul received the news seconds later. His vision narrowed. "Who?" he demanded. "Who overrode my authority?" "Terran forces. Warlord." A subordinate stammered. "They penetrated Sector 9 Gamma. The ring is now physically locked by the human ship as well. Attempting further separation could." Krazhul crushed the comm bead in his fist. He spun, intending to storm out, only to find his path blocked by Auriv Marines in full kit, weapons leveled. Admiral Talar Ison stepped through their line. "Warlord Krazhul," he said formally, "under concordance provisions on emergency station safety, and under authorization from the Kharas Gate Council, you are relieved of control of this facility pending investigation into catastrophic endangerment." "You dare!" Krazhul snarled. "You weak-spined cowards. You watched for decades as we harvested these worlds. You profited, and now you seize the chance to wash your hands in human theatrics?" Talar's face was pale, but his voice held. "You are right about one thing," he said. "We watched. That ends today." He nodded to his Marines. They moved in, binding Krazhul's arms with hardened restraints. Marak Dun, watching from a distance under uneasy Terran guard, felt a cold worm of fear twist in his gut. He had thought himself clever, serving a hegemon that used children as soldiers and calling it necessity. Now, he realized, the winds had shifted. If he misstepped, he might find his own name in a tribunal's docket. He also realized, grudgingly, that the humans had done something no one else had dared. They had forced the galaxy to look. Hours later, emergency quiet settled over Kharas Gate. Fires were out. Gravity normalized in most sectors. Transfer corridors filled with Terran personnel guiding the last groups of children either into Samaritan's cavernous bays or into secured sections of the station now under joint Auriv-Nisali oversight. Mireille moved through the temporary shelter that had once been a cargo hold, now filled with rows of cots. Her med teams were exhausted, faces drawn, but they kept working. They had treated burns, from shock collars, malnutrition, concussion. They had also treated nightmares, panic attacks, the 1,000-yard stares of kids who had seen too much. A small Nisali girl clung to her hand as she walked. The child's skin glowed faintly in calm green now instead of frantic red. "Where will we go?" the girl asked. "Somewhere safer," Mireille said. "Somewhere no one can sell you. We're working on the details." "It must be nice," the girl said softly, "to believe that is possible." Mireille squeezed her hand. "It will be," she said, "if we make it so." On a raised platform, Ines stood before a hastily assembled press cluster. Reporters and recorders from half a dozen species jostled for position. Feeds from Axiom Crown replayed clips in the background. Ember Ledger logs. Chainfall helmet cams. Seveia's empathic impressions translated clumsily into visual art. "This was not an accident," Ines said. "It was not the work of a few rogue slavers. It was a system. We participated in it too, in smaller ways. That ends now. The Terran Concord is initiating criminal proceedings against any of our entities named in the Ember Ledger. We invite other polities to do the same." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Some will say we overstepped," she continued, "that we had no right to disrupt a legal market, that we destabilized economies. To them I say, if your stability depends on caging children, perhaps it deserves to crumble. On Nisali worlds, Citizens watching through empathic links felt her conviction. On Auriv councils, delegates shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their populace had already seen the feeds and were now watching to see how they would respond. Seveia stood to the side, eyes distant. She had opened her mind so wide during the crisis that her empathic channels still hummed. She had shown her people the raw fear of the glass warrens, the sharp resolve of human soldiers, the dizzying, stubborn hope of children who had thought no one would ever come. When she spoke to her compacts assemblies later, she would tell them, "We felt something new today, a species that treats compassion like a weapon. I do not know if that is sustainable, but I know it is better than the alternative." Within weeks, the Orphan Liberation Network began to coalesce. It was not a formal government body. It was something messier. Nisali civil committees, Auriv reformists, Terran NGOs, and even a handful of Kolvar whistleblowers, all sharing data from the Ember Ledger, all coordinating to track down and intercept the smaller routes that fed conglomerate events like Kharas Gate's auction. Ruo-Fei worked with Kharas Gate engineers to set up the first nodes of the beacon array, distant, hidden stations on the edges of dangerous territories, stocked with food and medical supplies, designed to be waypoints for smuggling victims and refugees. Eunice flew the first test run through one of the new corridors, humming to himself as he skimmed just outside sensor nets. "I hope you appreciate," he told the Void, "how extremely expensive this moral high ground is." Back on Earth and on human colonies, the reaction was not universally celebratory. In some cities, people took to the streets to cheer when the first rescued children arrived. In others, pundits fumed about misplaced priorities, about Terrans bankrupting themselves for strangers. Elections turned on the question, did humanity want to be the galaxy's conscience, or did it want to mind its own business? Halbrook watched those debates from his office on the Samaritan, now often moored at beacon stations rather than at official docks. He read op-eds calling him a hero, and others calling him a traitor to Terran interests. He took neither too seriously. One quiet evening, or what passed for evening on a ship, Neha stopped by his office. She wore civilian clothes, a rare break from armor. "They're calling it Chainfall," she said, nodding toward a news feed scrolling across his wall. "The whole operation, the kids, the network, all of it." Halbrook chuckled softly. "I thought that was just a project code buried in Ruo-Fei's notes." "Well, it stuck." Neha leaned against the doorframe. "Some of them are proud. Some are angry. Do you regret it?" Halbrook thought of Kharas Gate's trembling ring, of Jarek bracing himself between children and space, of Mireille renaming a boy who had forgotten how to own anything, even himself. "No," he said. "I regret that we didn't do it sooner." Years later, the Hallow Reach system tried to put itself back together. The wars that had raged there had seeded many of the orphans Chainfall had rescued. Cities had been leveled, fields had burned, but time and stubborn work had coaxed green back from the soil. In orbit around a scarred planet, a polished conference station spun slowly, flags more, now, than at Kharas Gate, hung in its viewing galleries. Delegations from across known space gathered to negotiate a new framework for post-conflict reconstruction, one that would explicitly forbid treating displaced miners as commodities. In a shaded balcony above the main chamber, Admiral Halbrook stood, posture a little more stooped, hair gone, almost entirely white. He had retired from active command after Kharas Gate, under pressure and by choice, but he had been invited here as an observer, a relic, a reminder. On the floor below, the lead negotiator for a coalition of mid-tier worlds spoke with calm intensity. She moved with the ease of someone who had spent years navigating power, but her eyes carried old shadows. She had been one of the children in the glass warrens. She remembered the taste of recycled air and the sound of auctioneers' voices. She also remembered a human soldier kneeling to her level and saying, "You're going home," even though he hadn't known yet what home would be. Now she looked a Virukan delegate in the eye and said, "You cannot call us your future and feed us to your wars. We will not accept any doctrine that permits recruitment below a certain age, under any name, any pretense." Around the chamber, feeds captured the moment. On Nisali worlds, empathic echoes of her convictions spread. On Auriv media, commentators labeled her one of the Chainfall generation. In the balcony, Halbrook listened and felt something settle inside him. The Bach accounts were still strained. Trade relationships had changed. Humanity bore scars for what it had done. And yet here was a woman who should have died in silence, standing before the galaxy and telling it how things would be. Ines, standing beside him, murmured, "Worth it?" He did not take his eyes off the floor. "They were always going to tell stories about us," he said quietly. "About what kind of people we were. We just made sure one of those stories is this one." Below, the former orphan finished her statement. There was a moment's pause. Then, slowly, one by one, delegates nodded. The old economy would not vanish in a day. There would be backlashes. New black markets would try to spring up in the shadows. But the axis had tilted. Somewhere in the vast scatter of stars, a child in a cage heard a rumor. Humans had once spent more than they could afford to buy 30,000 strangers just to tear the collars off their necks. That rumor, in the years to come, would save more lives than any law. And every time someone thought about starting a new auction, about sorting children into lots and assigning them projected obedience indices, they would remember Kharas Gate. They would remember the sight of a human ship anchoring itself to a doomed ring, of soldiers placing their bodies between kids and vacuum, of a quiet admiral saying, "We will be poor, and we will live with who we chose to be." In a galaxy that had long since learned to accept cruelty as the price of order, that kind of madness was the most dangerous force of all.